Everybody, welcome back. CVM here with,
Braun-Duin.
otherwise known as BBD.
Yeah, that's right.
We are playing some Modern, and I'm going to be playing Affinity. I love me some robots. A little bit of an old school player. I've been playing for a while. I definitely played back when we could actually play with the artifact lands before those got the axe. This deck is very fun. I actually haven't played a whole lot of Modern, so I wanted to play something that would be, a little linear. I was a little familiar with it, so I decided to go with the Affinity deck. We're actually playing the list that Brian DeMars top 32'd the last Grand Prix in Kansas City with Affinity, and so let's take a look at some of the cards and some of the numbers. So we have all the standard culprits, really. I have Vault Scourge, Signal Pest, etc., etc. But we are only playing 2 Mem Knights instead of the full 4. What do you think about that, Brian? Do you think 2 is the right number, or should it just be a full 4 on all the zeros?
I think I can see 2, because a lot of times cards like Mem Knight and Ornithopter are just really terrible draws anytime other than your opening hand. So much like a lot of lists will only play 6 or 7 mana dorks because you don't want of the effect when you draw them later in the game. I can also see cutting down on some of those 1-drops, and Ornithopter, you have 2 Mem Knights and 4 Ornithopters, and I like that split because you want to have the evasion, because you're pretty much, this is pretty much 56 terrible cards and 4 Cranial Platings. That's pretty much the deck name you could call this deck. So I think it's important to have the Etched Champions, the Ornithopters, Signal Pest, etc. Cards that can actually connect when you put a plating on them, and they're not just getting blocked by a Garruk Death Touch Wolf or something.
But yeah, definitely. Now, Cranial Plating is obviously just the best card in the deck, but it plays a similar role to Gavany Township that a lot of people are familiar with now, where we're able to augment our terrible creatures in the late game when they're bad, as opposed to when they're awesome by themselves in the early games. Like the mana guys, you're shaving some, but when you play cards like Gavany Township or Cranial Plating, they're not all that bad in the late game because you can still make them an actual threat. So that's why Cranial Plating works very well with all the cheap artifact guys.
Yeah, and Cranial Plating, I would almost more compare it to Kessig Wolf Run, because it just
it's a lot better actually.
Yeah, because it just turns your Ornithopter, instead of going from a 0-2 to a 1-3, it's going from a 0-2 to a 12-2, and clocking your opponent, one-shotting your opponent usually.
Definitely. Now, Brian did decide to only play 3 Etched Champions and had 1 in the sideboard. I think that's probably wrong, but I'm probably wrong too, so who knows. But I feel like this is just the best threat in the deck.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I can understand only playing 3. Sometimes it's actually tough to cast as champion, and sometimes it's a little clunky if you draw too many of them. The deck's pretty land light, and a lot of times you're relying on some of your early creatures to actually produce mana for you by virtue of turning on your Mox Opals, turning on your Springleaf Drums. So sometimes if you open on a hand that's a couple Mox Opals, a Springleaf Drum, and 2 Etched Champions, you can't actually cast any of your spells. So it's definitely reasonable to play less than 4, but I tend to agree with you. I think I would just play the full 4. I think that's the second best card in the deck besides Cranial Plating in terms of it's something that actually it's very difficult for a lot of decks to deal with it actually.
Yeah.
So
now, even though it can be difficult to cast, like you said, it's hard to deal with. It's one of those cards that a lot of the times once you get it in play, you have a very good chance of winning, and it. So much, in fact, to the previous Modern Grand Prix in Portland, Zvi's top 4 Affinity list had 4 champions, 1 Master of Ethereum, and only played 2 Galvanic Blasts. So we even had 2 additional 3-drops, but those cards along the same vein are just if they're in play and not dead, you're dead. You're just going to win.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, one thing I like about Affinity is having that. I like the fact that you can have, the 0-1 beatdown strategy where you've just got a couple of 0-1s and maybe a 0-2 in play, but you're somehow just getting in for some points of damage with your Signal Pests and Ornithopters. But you can also play the game where you just have 1 creature that's massive. Yeah. So it kind of attacks opponents from different angles a lot of times.
Speaking of that 1 creature that's massive, we do have the one of the other few non-ban cards from the original Affinity deck. It's Arcboundravager. Thankfully, he was reprinted in Modern Masters, so he's a little less expensive for people that are trying to get into Modern and want to play Affinity. But this card is just absurd. Another card that lets us turn, our terrible 0 mana, 0 power creatures into just giant threats late game. And it also just allows us to add counters onto like Inkmoth Nexus or Blinkmoth Nexus and just kill our opponents that are stuck with a bunch of Supreme Verdicts in their hand.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I definitely anticipate myself getting ravaged by that card a few times. So, doing his old thing. But yeah, like he also really makes removal like kind of a dangerous gambit sometimes, where like, maybe you go to, like, if I go to like dismember your Arcboundravager, like all of a sudden now you have a 4/4 Inkmoth Nexus and I don't have a dismember anymore. Or like if I go to try to kill your Steel Overseer, now you have a 5/5 Etch Champion or something. You can just move counters around, which can, I don't know, it really makes it tough for other decks to like interact with you favorably a lot of times.
Definitely. And then last but not least, we have Thoughtcast. Most of the time it's just 1 mana, draw 2.
Almost recall. Close.
Almost recall.
Yeah.
About as close as we're going to get. But the card is just awesome in the deck. And we're able to cast it with Springleaf Drum and Mox Opal. So Drum is awesome with all of our 0 mana guys. But the new Legend rule has made Mox Opal $40 and worth every penny. It's a Mox early game, and at worst late game, it's a Lotus Petal.
Yep.
Like it's just so much better now than it was before.
Yeah, like there are always times where I'd be playing against like Affinity players and be like, man, they're really not casting cards in their hand. They must have like 19 Mox Opals stuck in there. But now they can like, use a Mox Opal, play another Mox Opal, use it, play the third Mox Opal, and cast something big, or like, whatever. So yeah, having access to a better Mox Opal definitely improves the deck. Can also lead to like much more explosive early turns too.
Absolutely. Which is what I'm hoping happens. And then again, we do have the Inkmoth and Blinkmoth Nexus. So, being as the deck is able to play only 16 lands, 8 of which are actual spells. So, I mean, we have a deck with 52 cards and 8 lands, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, like the ability to do that just really means that like all your opening hands, like you're gonna have so many hands that just have like a ton of threats. So it's like definitely a powerful effect to be able to do that, especially because like a lot of games are won with Inkmoth Nexus, like a surprising number. So
absolutely. All right, so that's the main deck. Let's go ahead and take a look at the sideboard and see what type of options a linear deck like this that's mostly colorless has to fight the field. All right, here we are back with the sideboard for the Affinity deck. We have some awesome spells in here, and then there's one omission that I was a little surprised with from Brian DeMar's deck, is he actually didn't play any Blood Moons in his sideboard. So Blood Moon has been traditionally a very powerful card out of the Affinity sideboard to combat basically any format that it's ever been legal in. But he's not playing any. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I don't know if it's like a metagame choice or he just like didn't want to. I mean, it does turn off his Inkmoths and Blinkmoths. Mm-hmm. But usually that's not too relevant when your opponent just can never play a spell the rest of the game. So
definitely. It also could just be that people are aware of it, and so they're playing a handful of basics.
Yeah. Like a lot of decks right now, such as like Splinter Twins, are sometimes even main decking Blood Moon. So, a lot people are prepared for it. Like they're not going to just fold to it. So
definitely. But we do have some Whip Flares here, so we can kill all of the Millerpod creatures and keep all of ours because they're artifacts. Dismember is just a great answer against any creature that we just need to kill. It's just like a 1 mana death mark, but kills any creature.
Really, that's interesting. Any creature.
Any creature. We have the 4th Etch Champion, like before. I see myself bringing that in most matchups, to be honest. Like.
Yeah, I think like the only time you don't want this card is against like. Some sort of a combo deck that's just where you're just trying to race. Like Etch Champion's not built to race, but any kind of grindy matchup where they're like, trying to kill your guys.
Like playing Tarmogoyfs.
Yeah, they're playing Tarmogoyf in their deck. If your opponent has Deathrite Shaman in their deck, you probably want the 3rd Etch Champion coming in, or 4th. So.
Definitely. Speaking of combo decks, we do have the Thoughtseize to help us have game against combo, like the blue-red deck that John Finkel's been championing since the birth of the format. And on the same vein, we have Thorn of Amethyst to also help combat those decks.
Yeah, Thorn of Amethyst is basically just like Thalia on a not stick.
Stickless Thalia.
Yeah, stickless Thalia. So
it's the stickless Thalia. And then we also have Ancient Grudge for the very popular Affinity Mirror Match.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, there are Paul Reitzels in the world, so there are people that like to play Affinity. But it also kills Birthing Pod out of the pod deck.
Yeah. And also an interesting note about Ancient Grudge is that Avacyn's collar is the symbol of her church. So
werewolves hate
it.
collars.
Yeah, they hate it. I don't know if you've read the flavor text recently, but do yourself a favor and don't.
And then we have Spell Sky as the last slot, just to help protect our cards. We have very high impact cards like Cranial Plating, and our lands can kill people, and so just having a way to protect them is just very, very huge.
Yeah, there's a lot of cards in the format like Lightning Bolt and Electrolyze that conveniently don't kill Spellskite but kill everything else in the deck. So being able to be like, send that back to Spellskite,
yeah,
it's pretty important.
We
also have that one basic island, so we're not always taking 2 damage off it.
We have Glimmer Void.
Yeah, that's right.
And Moxes.
And
Springleaf Drum.
Yeah, you can tap Spellskite to Springleaf Drum to activate Spellskite. That's a big game right there.
I mean, you act like this wasn't thought about ahead of time. We had a plan when we built it.
Yep.
And that's why it was there. So this is the sideboard. I'm definitely excited to see how the matchup plays. I feel like I probably have a slight edge. However, I'm inexperienced in the format. You are the modern master. And we're going to see how it goes.
All right. I'm not a modern master, but we will see how it goes. So.